Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 833. This week, we feature our interview with Brian Vallelunga, founder and CEO of Doppler. Brian and I discuss the importance of managing secrets. To use Brian's words, secrets are the keys to the kingdom. Today, any organization that does not secure the kingdom, the data, they manage is asking for trouble. Brian Vallelunga is the founder and CEO of Doppler, the first secrets management platform for developers. Doppler empowers tens of thousands of engineering and DevOps teams to seamlessly orchestrate, govern, and manage their secrets across environments at scale. Brian has been featured in Forbes 30 Under 30 and worked at improving safety at Uber. You can catch up with all of his background on LinkedIn, link in the show notes. Brian Vallelunga, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I am looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to this for a couple of reasons. The first is that a couple of weeks ago, I was on a call with some developers, webinar-y kind of thing, but also interactive. So at one point, I asked them how they manage their secrets, because I knew I was coming up on this interview and I wanted to do a little bit of research. So I ended up getting jokes about James Bond and all sorts of other fictional, spies. And I came to the conclusion that they really didn't know what secrets were, let alone how they were managing. So why don't we start actually with a little bit of basics and the whole idea of secrets and secret management. What is it and why should developers actually care about this?
Yeah, this is a great question. I'm so glad you asked. So secrets at the most fundamental level are credentials. Most developers, regardless if they know it or not, they actually use secrets almost every day. Most of the apps that or the code that they're writing talks to some other thing. It talks to a database. It talks to maybe Stripe for payment processing or Twilio for sending text messages or wherever it may be. And so secrets are those authentication keys. They're the API keys, the credentials, the encryption keys. A good way to think about it is like, is this a piece of text that authorizes me to another system? And would it be very scary or bad if it got out, right? Does it need to be a secret? And then secrets management is the practice of managing those secrets in either by yourself or with the team. Most of the time it's with the team in a way that works with the rest of the team, your infrastructure, and done in a very secure way. So really like the kind of general ethos that I think every good secrets manager should have. There's, in my hot take, not many good ones that follow this ethos, but we try to lead from the front here, which is making vegetables taste like candy. Vegetables being the security, candy being the developer productivity. We cannot force a security tool on a developer and say, hey, go use this thing if it makes them slower and worse and less productive. They're just generally not going to use it because they care about speed. They care about productivity. And so really a good secrets manager has to make them more productive in the process, and then also give them all the benefits of managing those credentials securely. And so I think that's like the most foundational layer of thinking about secrets.
I think that's fair. If we can't force a secrets manager on a developer if they don't want to use it, that leaves a lot of things wide open and problematic. How do you think a developer rationalizes that in their head?
It's pretty hard to rationalize it, I think, without listening to something like this. And the reason why is because a lot of times secrets are just commingled with configuration, like a port or a feature flag, something that doesn't necessarily need to be sensitive, and there really isn't any risk of it getting out if it does. And because they're commingled literally in the same place, they're usually how it work is they'll be injected in the environment. And then in development, they'll have an env file that injects it into the environment. In production, it's just directly injected. And so because they're all commingled, they all feel the same level of risk if they got out, right? They all feel equal, but they're actually not. And so what ends up happening is when they do get out, it can be very, very bad. And to kind of share what bad means, when a company has a data breach, that company immediately has an enormous amount of risk on its plate, right? Because a fundamental way of thinking about this is customers trust companies to keep their private data private, right? So if API keys are the digital keys to the digital kingdom, and all of a sudden a hacker has a free reign access to that digital kingdom, that private data is not private anymore. And most of the time, if those are bad actors getting access to that data, it's not like they're just going to keep it and put it on a hard drive somewhere. They're going to do something malicious with it. And I can actually share a personal story of how this impacted me very deeply and scared the shit out of me if you want later on. But some of the ways to think about this is when a data breach does happen, a company has immediate risk. They have brand reputation risk, customer churn. They're going to have an enormous amount of unplanned spend dealing with the legal, PR, and insurance issues that arise from this. They're going to have a massive amount of operational distractions because they're not focused on shipping code anymore. They're focused on repairing and keeping their brand intact and making sure that the data that they did lose, they can get a hold of in some way and clean up the mess. They may also have regulatory scrutiny, right? The government may step in. This happens from time to time. And if the government doesn't step in, if enough customers are impacted by this, they may band together and create a class action lawsuit. And I would argue very strongly that they are in their rights to litigate if a company didn't manage the literal keys to the digital kingdom, right? If your job as a company is to keep my data safe and you don't even protect the keys, then how are you keeping my data safe? And on the other side, there's people. And like at the end of the day, people trust these companies to keep their data safe. And so the real people who are the real side that's impacted with this is not actually the companies in my mind, because companies will eventually get slapped with a fine and move on. There'll be some stuff, there'll be some spike of work, maybe some litigation. But it's the real people at the end of the day whose private data is out. Like, I mean, imagine if every trip you ever took on Uber was out, or every meal you ever got, or every transaction you've ever made on Amazon got out, right? Like, that's a lot of information about you that can be used in incredibly nefarious ways. Again, I can talk about it to a personal story in a bit, but that's where I really think the real pain comes from. And that's all from mismanaging one credential, right? That one credential sets a domino effect. And if you want to see this in practice, go look at Microsoft. Russians hacked Microsoft's email exchange, and then from there got into the rest of their systems. There's tons of other data breaches that have happened where once they get access to one credential, it just dominoes all the way till you get to the big ones like the AWS credential or the GitHub credential or Azure or GCP, any of the cloud providers. Then it really starts to fall because those guys are usually the entry point to all the other things.
I quite understand. You have sold this story quite hard. Pray tell.
So I just moved to Texas. I was originally from California. I moved to Austin, Texas. And I eventually convinced my mom to come out and join me in Texas for a day or for a week. And one of those days we went to this barbecue spot and we're in line waiting for barbecue. And all of a sudden I get this call out of nowhere from people claiming to be government officials from the Texas Customs and Borders. And they say, we're investigating you because we have found a package that's in your name that has illegal money and drugs in it. And I'm like, oh crap, what just happened? Like, this is like the moment where you think your life just basically starts to fall apart, right? They're like, we have all this evidence on you. They start talking about this evidence. Then they start asking me questions about me to basically verify me and try to verify themselves, right? So they're like, did you live at these 5 addresses over the last 10 years? Have you done these transactions online? It was just like a bunch of stuff that like they should not have known about. Like, there's no way that a normal person should have known this information, which gave them credibility. And obviously, I'm like really freaking out. My mom is also freaking out quite a bit too. And at some point, we get our lawyers on the phone because we're taking this very seriously. Like, I'm getting investigated by the federal government at this moment. And at some point, they make one mistake and we realize it was a scam. But it was like an hour on that phone call. And I'm sure during that hour, I gave up more intelligence that they can then try to use to scam me again in the future. And so one of the big scary parts about this is that one data breach with one set of data can then make an authentic scam call that leads to more data getting out. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so if a data breach has 1 million people impacted, those 1 million people could have 2 to 3 attacks, and the third attack is the one that really gets them. And I genuinely thought that I was being investigated by the federal government, and it scared the crap out of me. And because of that fear, I was willing to give up more information that I never should have. Thank God I never gave away my social security number. But like, I gave away address information of like where I've lived in the past, where I was right now in that exact moment, things that they should not have known, that they had no right to know, they now know. And that could be used against me in the future. And this is all comes back to all that data came from different data breaches. So I've been in like 5 or 6 data breaches. And like, I know exactly where that data came from because like I can see, this company had a breach at this time. These are the set of things that gave them that kind of intel. And so there is a real impact. And I'm sure if I gave them just the right amount of stuff, they probably couldn't have gotten access to way more sensitive stuff like my bank account or ruin my credit or wherever it may be. So that was a story that really hit home for me.
And you're sophisticated and you're in the business. So the fact that they could, basically hold you on a phone call for an hour kind of thing is really scary because if it was my father or my father-in-law in a nursing home, they'd be doomed.
Yeah, it wouldn't take 3 calls. It'd take 1. And I also have like lawyers on the call at this point, like who are trained in this. Everyone, including our legal team, goes through cybersecurity awareness training and scam protection training. So like we are all very well trained on this. And we think about this stuff all day long. And still they got us for an hour. Like, and that's not without AI. AI is just going to make this problem 1,000 times worse. And like, I think honestly, one of the things that got us was their accent came out at like a really weird moment where it went from this like hardcore English accent or American accent to like an Indian accent. And I was like, oh, okay, that there's something there. There was a shift. And then we put a couple other breadcrumbs together and we got us. But like AI won't make that mistake when it emulates a voice in the future.
No, probably not. And I've had friends that worked on the Target breach and also lost a lot of my credentials in the one of the governmental breaches. So I understand this stuff, and it is frightening even for people in the business. How can this be managed?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing before we kind of get into any solutions, and by the way, I'm not here really to pitch Doppler. Like that's not my sole purpose here. I'm here as a PSA. I want developers to care enough about managing secrets. They could choose our competitor for all I care, but the problem needs to be fixed because I'm tired of seeing data breaches. I'm getting impacted. My family's getting impacted by this and my friends. So from the lens of solving the problem, the first thing you need to do is understand, do you have the problem? And there are 4 questions. That's a quick sniff test to see if you have the problem of not managing your secrets, which often comes off as being called secret sprawl. And the 4 questions are, where are all my secrets? Who has access to them? When were they accessed last and by who? And can I stop a data breach when it happens? If you cannot confidently answer those 4 questions in depth with confidence, you are not managing your secrets. Right? We didn't talk about any features. We just talked about those 4 questions. And so if you can't answer those 4 questions, then what you should do is you should look for a solution that can answer those. And so I think a good solution does these sets of things. The first thing it does is it centralizes all your secrets in one place across all projects, all environments, all team members, and all infrastructure. Because once you have one central place where all your secrets are stored, you know where all those secrets are. You kind of like, instead of like missing a spot accidentally, like imagine the days before that where you have some secrets on developers' laptops, some in infrastructure, some somewhere in S3 storage. You just have it scattered all over the place. And then what happens when a data breach happens? You have no guarantee that you can actually swap out all the secrets to the new secrets. You have no guarantee that that individual person was the one that created the leak or some outage or whatever it may be. You basically lose all your ability to have guarantees as a security professional or as a developer. So the first thing you need to do is you got to know where all your secrets are, where all your files are. Once you're able to do that, you need to be able to put access controls around them. You need to be able to say developers can have access to the development environment, but they shouldn't have access to production. You need to be able to have approval flows so that when a developer needs to get a secret into production or those higher stage environments, there's someone who does have access, usually the DevOps security team, that can click the approve button without the end developer seeing those secrets. We call them pull requests or change requests. You need to be able to have an audit trail of everything that's happening in that org, because when a breach does happen and the auditors of the regulatory body or even the lawyers come in and compliance comes in, they're going to say, okay, show me who's had access to every single secret that's been breached, when they were accessed last, what was their IP address, what was their location. You need to be able to have that strong audit trail, not just to cover your backs, but also to understand how the breach happened and prevent it in the future. And then the system needs to be natively integrated with the infrastructure. You cannot be copying and pasting secrets directly into AWS and GCP. That is not a recipe for success for a couple reasons. The first is that your code is automatically deployed, right? It's on a CI/CD workflow. If your secrets aren't too, and your secrets need to be there before your code uses it, then you have a race condition, essentially, every single time you add a secret. And that can cause an outage. But separately to that, when you have a breach and every second counts, because at every second think about 1 second is very fast for a human, but for a machine, that's very slow. So if a hacker's in your system and they're downloading a couple gigabytes of data a second, every second counts. So if you have to go and copy and paste this thing into AWS, that may take 30 seconds to a minute. And now you've lost 30 to 60 gigabytes of data, maybe even more, maybe even 90 to 120, right? So depending on those speeds. So it needs to be natively integrated. You need to be able to click a button in the secrets manager and your infrastructure immediately has it. And the last thing is you need to be able to remediate a breach. You need to be able to wipe out the credentials that got stolen and issue new credentials in a way that does not cause downtime. And there are ways that secrets managers do that today. It's usually the 2-key system and a rolling practice. I don't want to get into that on the call. It gets a little technical, but there are ways of doing that without any downtime.
You mentioned remediation, but you didn't mention actually recognizing that you had a breach. Why'd you make that distinction?
It's a good question. I think it's not the role of a secrets manager to detect a breach. It's honestly a set of other tools. Like I'd probably point to Wiz and say, do we have any alerting around an S3 bucket being drained way faster than we should have from an IP address that we don't know about? Or connecting with GitGuardian or TruffleHog for secret scanning and say, okay, have we found any of our secrets out in the wild somewhere or in places it shouldn't be? We also do that too. So we're connected with GitHub secret scanning and a couple others. So through our partners, if we ever detect that you've had a secret that's been in a breach, we'll try to alert you, and if we can, rotate that credential for you. So we try to do it as well. But the role of the secrets manager is to do the management part of those secrets and help you when before a breach and after a breach, and then ongoing day-to-day operations. And then we rely on the rest of this security industry to help you identify those breaches.
So obviously tools are involved. If we step and think about the people side of this equation for a second, who should own managing and governing secrets?
Great question. At the end of the day, from what we've seen from most enterprises, which I think is a pretty good model, is it's either owned by one or two teams. It's owned by usually the DevOps team or the platform engineering team. And then sometimes it's owned by the security engineering team or DevSecOps. Those are the teams that are centrally responsible for setting up the tooling and the processes for managing secrets. And then that tooling and process gets propagated down to the product teams and the feature teams.
If you were to start a company tomorrow that was doing software, which of those two models would you choose?
Well, when you're starting a company that early on, you don't get the affordance of having a DevOps and security team. So it's really the CTO's responsibility. At the end of the day, like a good way to think about it is like there's a set of responsibilities and it shifts between the roles depending on the scale of the company, right? So if you're a startup with like 3 people and there's like a CEO, a developer, and a CTO, the CTO is responsible, right? And then at some point when you're a Series A company, you maybe have a couple senior engineers and then may shift, they may stay in the CEOs, or it may go to like the staff engineer, the one who's like maybe running day-to-day engineering. And then when it gets all the way to like Series D, at that point, you probably have like a DevOps team, a security team, and it's their responsibility. But so the responsibilities shift among the roles depending on the scale of the company.
You've been a serial entrepreneur, and that's, defines you. As someone with a technical background, and obviously a lot of the software process and measurement cast listeners would probably have somewhere in their goals to be, to try to be a successful entrepreneur. How do people that start technical and then become a successful entrepreneur, how do they have to shift their mindset?
Oh, that's hard. So I think it really depends on the kind of company you're building. And also, where are you? So there's lots of different types of CEOs. That's the first thing to note. Mm-hmm. And you really have to be the CEO that matches your skill sets and your and what the company needs out of you. And so I know that's a little bit vague, but I'll give a couple examples. Let's just say you're in an operationally intensive business and the entire founding team is technical. Well, one of those founders is going to need to learn how to be the operational wizard, right? They're going to need to master that craft. But in a different scenario, let's just say you're building a startup that services developers. It may actually be really powerful for the CEO to stay incredibly close to the product and functionally be that chief product officer for a long time. And so you really have to stick to the strengths and figure out what the company needs. At least in my journey, is I've tried to stay very close to the product. And I would argue to some degree, I don't think I've done the best of job of that. There are times, probably a year, where I was too far away from the product. I gave too much trust to our product team, and I didn't, as a leader, lead enough in that area. I've gotten much more involved lately. And if I was going to do it all over again, I probably would find some way to basically be the chief product officer for as long as I possibly could, until basically the system started breaking down and I wasn't able to repair it fast enough. Because for a lot of companies, the product is like the heart of the company.
So at some point, though, it sounds like as Doppler grows, at some point you probably will have to put away the keyboard. What do you think that's going to look like?
I think at least for me in Doppler, it will come down to aligning on what we want to accomplish as a company. And I don't just mean from a revenue perspective. I mean from the perspective of what is the high level quarter and year strategy for the business? What are the markets we're going to go enter? How are we going to go and attack those markets and be the best in class we can for it in the Doppler-esque way? And align on that across the board, not just with product, but with every leader, so that sales, marketing, they're all rowing the same direction together and timing releases and big pushes. And that's really where I see that gear shift happening. And then, of course, our product leaders will go work on that. And so I think a good way of thinking about that I found is when you're like a seed stage startup, you're thinking day to day as a CEO. And maybe you get to month to month. When you get to Series A, you're very much thinking month to month. And at the very, very end of the Series A, you're probably starting to think at quarter to quarter. And that's where I am thinking right now is we have strong leaders in every department, including product. And my job is to think at a quarter to quarter level and plan out ahead. And our leaders are there to operate on that quarter.
What if you were going to suggest to someone who is trying to emulate your success, what should they learn before they try to go down this path?
Well, I'd say the first thing is do not emulate the path do not emulate the success by emulating the path. That's, I think, a recipe for disaster. And that was a mistake I made looking at other founders. And the reason why is because there was a sort of circumstances that allowed this path to be successful that will not be available for the next person. The world has changed. A really good example of that is if someone's starting a company now, by the time that they get far enough along where they have a seed round and then maybe far enough along where they do a Series A, it's been 2-3 years by now. At that point, think about what model OpenAI will have, right? That model will be so freaking capable. It could probably do a vast amount of engineering and product and design for you. And so the structure of the company will be dramatically different because you don't need as many people. It will be financially irresponsible to go and hire a designer if you can have an AI do that for you at the level and quality that you'd expect of a person. And so their path will be very, very different than ours. But I think when you look at how to get to that level of success, the thing you should focus on is what are first principles thinking. What is the root problem that I'm trying to solve? How deep is that problem? How painful is it? A good vitamins versus painkiller thing is you don't ever want to build a vitamin. A vitamin is something that you can take once a day or not, and it won't really affect you either way. A painkiller is you're going to get that. If you just got your leg chopped off and you need a morphine hit because you're in incredible pain, you will do whatever it takes to get that morphine hit. And let's go one step further than that. What you really want is you want a lifesaver. You want something where imagine if someone's on their deathbed and they're 4 days away from dying, and someone comes over and says, if you take this shot, you get to survive. It doesn't matter how much money's in your bank account. You're going to spend all of it to get that shot, right? And that's how you should be thinking about the severity of the problem you're solving. And if you can do that, If you can find a problem that is that severe, a lot of other things just naturally work out. You'll figure out how to hire. You'll figure out how to raise money. You'll figure out how to scale because you'll have the ability to scale. If you do not have a problem that severe, you will never get the ability to scale because you will not get enough revenue in the door to justify scaling.
You're currently in the secrets management world. Why is that so critical today?
Well, it's becoming even more and more critical for a lot of the reasons we talked about. Data breaches are becoming more and more prevalent. Companies are getting larger and larger. There's more projects. Those projects have more secrets, and there's more developers working on them. And there's more infrastructure where those secrets need to get coordinated with. So the risk, if you kind of like had like an equation that could generate a risk score from all these different properties, that risk score is rising and rising and rising among all companies right now. And then on the other side, you got to remember that the game of defense is a very different game than the game of offense. The game of defense is build your walls as high as possible, make sure there's no cracks so the invaders can't come in and steal everything. The attacker's job is to find that one crack you missed, hit it as hard as freaking possible, bring down the wall, and then invade with force. And so in the world of secrets, which is often something dramatically overlooked, that is the crack. That is the crack in the wall. And I think it's a freaking glaring crack because it's the literal keys to the digital kingdom. But it's still a crack nonetheless if it's overlooked. And so if hackers are looking at all the different ways that they can gain access to the data, that's what they really want. They don't want to, like, most of the time, hackers don't really want to take down a company. They just want the data. That's what they're going after. And so if they're trying to get access to that data, one of the quickest paths is to get access to the literal keys. You don't need to go through this 20-step hack if you can just get access to the keys that unlock the door, right? And so it just happens to be that's the major crack. So it's even worse. I'd much rather it be some crack where they have to do 20 separate hacks to eventually get to these keys because they're so locked down, right? Like that'd be a really good place to be at, is you have like layers and layers of defense. Defense in depth is what it's called. That's what you want. But if that's the glaring crack today, then companies are going to continue to get breached left and right. And while companies can pay those fines and take the reputational hits, some may recover, some may not. Real people, real Americans, and just people across the world are going to pay that price.
So that is the hacked off leg, and secrets management is the morphine hit?
Yes. And I think what's one thing that's tricky about us is it's actually more like the secrets management problem is more like the knife that's about to cut the leg. And the leg is the body is the company. And it hasn't hit yet. So you don't need the morphine yet. But that blade is swinging. And what I'm trying to say is, hey, I can sell you a shield today that makes sure that you don't even need that morphine hit. Our company will sell you both, the morphine and the shield. I prefer you buy the shield.
Well put, well put. So if you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a cup of whatever your caffeinated beverage of choice was, and you had a magic wand at the same time, and you had two wishes that would allow you to solve the secrets management thing, what would those two wishes be and why?
I would make it a regulatory and compliance requirement. So those are my two wishes. That secrets management that can answer those four sets of questions, and each secrets manager has the set of things we talked about: centralized secrets, audit controls, access controls, ability to remediate a breach, and integrate it directly in infrastructure. I would have that a requirement in SOC 2, NIST, HIPAA, basically every compliance body and regulatory body that governs software. I would put it in. That'd be my one wish. If you do that, you solve the industry tomorrow. It's done.
Given that we're all seeing the impact of hacks, whether they're governmental, bodies hacking or non-governmental bodies, why is that? Why does that almost sound like that wish would be really hard to get to fruition, but so important to do? Why is that such a tough hill to die on?
I think with anything with regulation and compliance, it just takes a lot of time. It's a very slow thing on purpose. Like our entire government works because laws are slow to change. They need to, by design, right? Like if you just went at the whims of whatever was hot today, laws would be changing left and right, and you would have a stable government. And so you need enough of a delay to really know that this is something that people want. And I think that practice has bubbled down into compliance bodies too, because they're ruled by a lot of times the same groups of people. Now, for what it's worth, secrets management has started to enter NIST, which is like the fundamental layer that then bubbles up, which is then bubbled up into SOC 2. So it's working its way, and it's going to happen. It's just a function of time. I think the real question is like, how many hacks and how many people need to be hurt before the government says we need to expedite this, right? I would love for them to expedite this like they expedited the COVID vaccine, right? Push this thing through. The rules are simple. This thing is only going to do good. It's not going to do any harm. And we're just adding another shield so that we don't have one less. Oh, so we have one less crack.
Fair. Brian, this has been absolutely fantastic. At this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you like. You've educated the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners. Tell us what we need to do.
I am slightly biased and say try out Doppler. Doppler was designed for the everyday developer to use and love. It takes small companies 1 to 2 days to set up Doppler, medium-sized companies like Series A to B a couple weeks, and then C and on a couple months. So it's really quick, and we try to deliver 2 hours of productivity back every single week to developers. So you're going to get literal time back in your day by using Doppler. And we have some amazing customers that use us. We have TripAdvisor, Children's Cancer Institute, Puma, StockX, Accenture, which is one of the top 4 accounting firms in the world, Crumble Cookies. And we actually have one other top 4 accounting firm in the world using us at a very large deployment as well. So you're in great company. But if you just choose not to use Doppler for whatever reason, I'd love to at least hear about it. But please, the most important part is to solve your secrets management problem. Again, I could care less if it's Doppler. I prefer it, but it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is we protect the people that we're responsible for protecting by using a secrets manager.
Brian Vallelunga, thank you for sharing with the Software Process Measurement Cast listeners. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Mastering Work Intake. Mastering Work Intake by Jeremy Willets and myself is your path to addressing IT's nasty and dirty little secret, poor work intake. Simply put, if you don't control work intake, it controls you, your team, your organization. Buy a copy and begin to control the flow of work for your team and organization. Link in the show notes. Or go to Amazon, type in Mastering Work Intake. Go to J. Ross Publishing, type in Mastering Work Intake. Buy a copy. In Reread Saturday News, recently I read it in the newspaper, the indictment of Eric Adams, mayor of New York. He resigned after I wrote the essay. While I understand that the indictment and guilt are not synonymous, the words he has used in the past to define his character and his actions do not seem to be congruent. His character as defined by his actions to a Stoic is found wanting. This week's chapter is all the more powerful with these current events as a backdrop. Chapter 7 begins the third section of How to Be a Stoic by Massimo Pigalucci. Buy a copy, read along, link in the show notes. The section title is The Discipline of Action, How to Behave in the World. Action is the second core discipline of Stoicism. Chapter 7 is titled, It's All About Character and Virtue. A better title might be, Hello, Mr. Adams? Catch up on all of the entries in the reread of How to Be a Stoic. Links in the show notes. In the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 834, we'll feature 20 questions you can use to create work intake cognitive dissonance. Why would you want to create cognitive dissonance? If you can't get people to question the status quo, you'll never generate change. We also have a visit from John M. Quigley. John brings his Alpha and Omega product development column to the podcast. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?